Abyssinia, a mysterious country located in the mountains of Africa, which today is known as Ethiopia, the cradle of early Christianity. A unique land of biblical stories and myths. Historic Aksum in northern Ethiopia was once the capital of a powerful kingdom. On the site of two previous religious buildings, its ancient cathedral was rebuilt in 1665. Thrones constructed of stone have witnessed the coronation of various monarchs whose Ethiopian Orthodox faith from the 5th century spread far and wide. From the Eastern Roman Empire, fleeing the missionaries known as monophysites introduced the ancient Christian faith, which taught that Christ had only one divine nature. Eventually the concept of a division of faith came into being, and Ethiopian Christianity developed independently. Aksum became a sacred city. Heavy carpets cover old wall paintings of the early history of Christianity, of which only a short glimpse is permitted. Unique colored paintings of saints, martyrs, and Mary with the child Jesus. Aksum is also referred to as Ethiopian Rome. It is the capital of the oldest Christian kingdom in the world, the largest outside the Roman Empire, and crossroads to caravan routes to Arabia, Egypt, and Nubia. An enigma lies within a small chapel next to the cathedral. Here, a monk is said to protect the Ark of the Covenant, the true sanctuary of Ethiopia, believed to contain the text of the 10 Commandments which God sent to Moses. The new cathedral was established in 1965 under Haile Selassie I, the last emperor of the Solomonian dynasty. It is one of Ethiopia's few religious buildings in which people gather to celebrate Mass, which lasts for several hours. Emperor Ezana converted to Christianity at the beginning of the 4th century. A diocese of the Ethiopian Church was built, from which Haile Selassie separated himself. Byzantine missionaries spread the faith, and the 9 Syrian saints continue to be revered as the true founding fathers of the Ethiopian Church. Religious commandments and festivals rule the lives of the people. In the new cathedral, a 600-year-old Bible forms part of its well-preserved treasures. Here, too, are colourful paintings of martyrs and of the Virgin Mary with the child Jesus. Around the huge church building there are always a large number of believers. It exudes the magical power of a sacred land and an atmosphere of peace. The ruins of Aksum are dominated by around 130 steles, obelisk-like monoliths of trachyte. a splendid sight. Others lie in pieces on the ground. The steles of the Aksumite culture were created from natural stone, from which numerous grave sites were marked out. The idea of the grave as being the house of the dead led to the decoration of the steles as a kind of living room. Thus arose the story stela, a construction method that combines layers of stone with wooden beams. At the time of Christ's birth, this was a prosperous center of power and culture, and the rich and powerful had imposing tombs built. The largest stela lies in pieces on the ground. One of the largest worked monoliths in the world, it most probably collapsed at the actual moment of installation. At the base of the collapsed stela tomb, entrances have been exposed on both sides. Only a few of the underground grave chambers are open to the public. On today's western periphery of Dongur lie the ruins of a relatively modest complex, popularly known as the Palace of the Queen of Sheba. The Bible states that the legendary Queen of the South visited King Solomon in Jerusalem in order for him to teach her the Jewish faith. Solomon fell in love with her, and due to trickery managed to seduce her. When the queen returned, she gave birth to a baby boy, Solomon's son. When he reached maturity, Menelik traveled to his father and became heir to the throne. When he returned to Aksum, he secretly took the Ark of the Covenant with him. Next to the palace are the remains of the Gwudet Stele field, which is named after the queen who is said to have destroyed Aksum. The journey through the modern city is like traveling back in time, with gravel roads, goods carrying camels, and small huts made of wood and clay. The women go to fetch water. In the north, the large water basins of Mei Shum are known as the Baths of the Queen of Saba. They date back to Aksumitic times and have been frequently renovated. This huge cistern supplies much of the population with water. On a hill above the town are the underground grave chambers of King Kalib and Gebre Maskal. Although little remains of the former capital of the Aksumitic kingdom, Ethiopia's holiest site, it continues to be a place of mystique and legend. In the mountainous highlands of Ethiopia, there is an extraordinary treasure of the history of mankind: the 11 rock churches of Lalibela. In the 13th century, the famous Amhara sovereign Lalibela decided to establish a new Jerusalem in his kingdom. in their construction, the rock churches are among the most little-known miracles of the world. Well disguised in the red, tough rock. The World Redeemer Church of the House of the Holy Saviour is located at the highest point of the steep Luster Mountains. This monolith church was completely carved out of the rock. First, the outer contours were defined by way of ditches. Then the stonemasons worked on both the external and interior design. From floor to ceiling, domes, windows, doors and pillars gradually developed. Even today, pilgrims and visitors are deeply touched by its unusual atmosphere. A maze of paths and tunnels carved into the rock connect the first group of churches. This, the Beta Mariam, the House of St. Mary. In the center of an underground courtyard is a monolith church whose three entrances appear as small porches decorated with arches and windows. There are various entrances, and the external walls are of axiomite design. The interior of the monolith church looks like a fully furnished basilica, with a narthex, nave, 2 aisles, and a dome above the sanctuary. Paintings of biblical motifs and stone ornaments adorn both columns and walls. It is believed that Beta Mariam was the first building to be built in King Lalibela's reign. Lalibela was the most important king of the Zakwe dynasty, in whose honor the old capital of Roha, located in the secluded mountains, was named. When a boy, Lalibela was chosen by a swarm of bees to be king. The colony gently enshrouded him like a cloud, a heavenly sign. Separated by tunnels and walls, 2 smaller rock churches follow, Bete Debra Sina and Bete Golgotha. Both appear as one. The external pathways are narrow and difficult to negotiate, and in each small niche live the priests and monks who tend to the churches. The various caves and chapels each have a name, such as Adam's tomb, and other such biblical names. The route leads back to the surface, down the mountain, and passes a traditional village of bee huts. Next, and seen from above, the most beautiful church of all in the form of a Greek cross, Bete George, consecrated to St. George. Isolated from the other churches, it lies hidden in a deep shaft that is accessed by way of a winding corridor. According to legend, the pious king Lalibela wanted to create a new Jerusalem. And the valley of the River Jordan was designed to separate the two groups of churches. The double church of Gabriel and Raphael belongs to the second group. Again, red tufa corridors and bridges lead to the holy places. At first, from a corridor, only the facade is visible because the churches are hidden within the rock. A facade of 30 meters decorated with 7 niches. Inside is a small central area which connects adjoining rooms that are dedicated to the archangels Gabriel and Raphael. Winding and narrow, the route winds up and soon enters a higher world. From here, Beta Emmanuel is seen in all of its glory, as well as the unique design of the famous churches of Lalibela. The church's interior was carefully hollowed out and carved into arches, pillars and ornaments, from floor to ceiling. For more than a generation, many skillful stonemasons from Jerusalem and Alexandria carved out this 8th wonder of the world from the volcanic rock of the plateau. Again, narrow paths lead to Abba Libanos, one of the 9 saints' churches. It lies at the deepest point of the group. All 4 sides have been separated from the rock. Only the roof is formed by the mountain. Axiomatic and Moorish windows decorate the facade. According to legend, to replace the exhausted stonemasons, God himself sent hard-working angels to continue the work throughout the night, so helping to create the new Jerusalem in Lalibela. Lake Tana in the north of the country is famous for its ancient churches and monasteries located on a number of its 37 islands. Tropical vegetation covers the volcanic cone that protrudes like an island from the largest inland lake of the Ethiopian highlands. Dega Stephanos lies in the middle of the lake and contains one of the country's most important monasteries. Along the way, again and again, are the simple stone huts of the monks who lead a tranquil life of solitude. On the summit, framed by walls and hidden under great trees, stands the monastery of Holy Stephanos. The Ark of the Covenant was brought to the island from Aksum in order to save it from destruction during hostilities wrought by Ahmad Gran. In a small treasury, various mummies are preserved in glazed wooden coffins. Here the remains of 5 emperors of various dynasties lie at rest. Over the years, various crowns, valuable books and precious crosses have been placed here, protected by royal guards. Remarkable sacred treasures and masterpieces of Ethiopian arts. Today, a smaller number of monks live here. They keep the faith and the spiritual heritage of a legendary culture. The first island monasteries were probably erected under the reign of Amda Sayan Luaya Christos and his successor in the 14th century. Monks from Tigray and Shur discovered this deserted island and founded various monasteries. But today, only a few monuments remain. Dek is the largest island and can be seen in the distance. Two water towers and a bell tower of typical Gondar design protect the Naga Selassie church. The island was also a place of exile for disgraced dignitaries. Empress Mentewab, the Gondar who conducted official business during the reign of her son Iyasu II, authorized construction of this complex in 1746. "24 stone-like pillars that support a large roof adorn the outer ring of a path that leads around the church. This outer area is called Kene Malet and is intended for the depteres and laity who attend church services here. Wooden doors form the entrance to the church. The magnificent murals in the interior of the rotunda are amongst the most beautiful and well-preserved of those that are known as Second Gondar design. Religious faith is still deeply rooted in the daily lives of the inhabitants of the highlands. The circular church was developed from typical Ethiopian circular huts and was used to store the holy boards. There is no altar, just a shrine, the Machtas, which is surrounded by painted walls, the motifs of which were often depicted as what could be called comic strips. Bible stories were told, and archangels with raised swords were drawn next to Mary and St. George, seated on a horse. Many religious commandments and festivals dictate the lives of the people. On the 11th of September, a festival is celebrated in honor of John the Baptist. and on the 27th of September, Maskal, the feast of finding the Holy Cross. The Trinity watches over numerous saints and is surrounded by scenes from numerous stories of salvation, and from purgatory to the journey to heaven. With these paintings, the guardians of faith were able to teach and preserve Christian laws and values. The common people were not allowed to enter the interior of the church, and so celebrated outside. By boat, we travelled to the south of Lake Tana, to the Zege Peninsula, a romantic, natural landscape. The boat travels for some time along a jungle-like bank. The peninsula appears to be uninhabited, with no apparent easy access. In the dry season, a road from the mainland is used. Otherwise, there's only this restricted embarkation point on the south coast. Now the scenery looks like a romantic bay, and only the gentle lapping of the waves disturbs the peace. The few people who live here use the water from the lake. Children bathe in it, and waterfowl search for food in the grass on the banks. A splendid place where once politicians met. A narrow path leads through coffee and geisho bushes to a hill within the monastery area, at the center of which is the impressive monastery fort. People subsequently settled outside the complex. The entrances and walls give the impression that in hostile times the monastery was a place of refuge. Here treasures were also protected, such as books and crosses. The monastery church of Ukhra Kidane Mechret is also a circular building, with the walls of its external, covered thoroughfare adorned with contemporary wall paintings. Partly completed works of art can be seen on the walls, and the stages of development of the paintings are easy to discern. The history of the hidden island monastery is long, and most notably includes the hostilities of the Oromo tribe in the land of the shore. There the emperor's fort was taken piece by piece from shore, back to the islands of Lake Tana, when the monastery experienced a new prosperity and became the seat of government. This also explains the quality of both the churches and the paintings of this region. The monastery church is like an encyclopedia of Ethiopia's religious history. Close by to the south is the small island of Kebran. A plaque by the entrance gate indicates that females are not permitted to enter the monastery. The route up to the monastery leads through dense vegetation and past the monks' circular huts. The small monastery is one of the oldest in Ethiopia. Here in 1350, Abba Johannes of Shur settled and was eventually buried here. The exterior of the church indicates the strict design of the country's early sacred buildings. The pictures appear meager and faded, although beautiful lattices adorn the windows. Few of the original paintings on the walls, pillars, and wooden gates have managed to survive. On both the window grilles and murals are the typical features of Gondar design. Albeit in a rather modest way. Nearby are the sacred treasures of the monastery, protected by various guards. The crowns of various priest-emperors are visible in simple glass boxes, including crosses and manuscripts which were written on goatskin parchment. Next to the churches there is a bell and sound stones, large horizontally hanging boulders that are struck with a stone. Just a short boat ride and we arrive at the eastern shore of Lake Tana. A thicket of papyrus encircles a tiny offshore island. Judging by the appearance of a small, inconspicuous church, it's difficult to believe that here once stood a famous monastery with 5 churches. Debre Mariam. This was once part of a monastery under Emperor Amda-Sion, and Emperor Iyasu I decreed that a religious council be held here. Numerous disputes of various monastic orders of the nature of Christ were resolved here, if necessary, by force. The emperor even permitted entry to those on stretchers who feigned illness. But the council failed to unify opposing groups. Today, the Woito tribe graze their cattle outside the church and continue to use boats of plaited papyrus. People still live as in bygone times when the first Christian missionaries founded the island monasteries. About 100 kilometers north of Lake Tana is Gondar, a famous royal city of the 17th and 18th centuries, a city of palaces and castles. Abyssinia, in the year 1636, for the first time in the country's history, King Fazilida's reign began with the construction of a walled palace. Until then, the emperors of that time took part in various campaigns during the dry season, Only during the rainy season was the court located within a camp. So, in the course of a century, a huge fortification was built with several royal palaces and a number of churches. It was believed that by selecting this location, the ancient prophecy of Emperor Lebna-Dengo had been fulfilled, and thus one of his successors would reside in a city whose name would begin with the letter G. The interior of King Fasilides' palace contains a unique combination of influences from Portugal, Aksum, and India. The main floor comprises a reception room and dining rooms. The walls were decorated with similar symbols such as the Star of David of the Salomon dynasty. The symbol of Gondar was restored with a wooden ceiling and clay plaster. The palace consists of 4 circular corner towers connected by a wall and a central tower. Emperor Johannes, son of Fasilides, took over the throne after his father's death in 1667, when he had the palace extensively enlarged. But apart from the library tower and an adjoining wall, little of it is visible today. The remaining architecture is reminiscent of European castles. The small 2-story building is of yellow plaster and contains an external staircase. As a devout Copt emperor, Johannes expelled the Jesuits and any Catholics who did not want to change their religion, and separated Muslims and Falasha Jews. But conflict among religious groups proved unavoidable. The next emperor, Fasilides' grandson Iyasu I, had a further 2-story palace built close to that of his grandfather. An imposing building 40 meters long and with 3 additional towers. Elements of Arabian, African and European design were skillfully united. Construction of the palace was carried out using traditional methods, and it's a fascinating sight. Here too is a tall, domed main hall, used mainly for formal occasions. The emperor's living quarters were far smaller. The time of the first Gondar emperors is one of the most important periods of Abyssinia's history. It included the expansion of the country and its political influence. In those days, envoys of the Pope were duly received and Gondar experienced an economic boom. Local art also enjoyed a period of prosperity. Dawit III, a son of Emperor Iyasu, had his palace built in the north of Fazil Gebi, protected by a 900-meter-long wall. The large ballroom was known as Singer Hall because within it contests were held that featured wandering minstrels, and Dawit played the harp. Today the lion cages are empty, but Haile Selassie, the last emperor of Ethiopia, possessed one as a symbol of his origin as having been from the tribe of Judah. Even the archive is like a small castle, and yet was home to so much of Gondor's art and culture, Gondor having been the religious centre of Ethiopia. Even if the importance of the emperors began to decline after 1700 AD, the country's high level of culture continued until the last quarter of the 18th century. It is said that anyone who wanted to be educated was given a meal at court, and those who could read and write could accompany their meal with a beer. The former Turkish baths are now in ruins, but they were very much in evidence at that time and no doubt gave much comfort to those who used them. But all this was little known outside the country due to its self-imposed isolation. Under Emperor Bakafa, imperial power was consolidated for the last time. He too had a palace built within the Fasil Gebe. It consisted of two 50-metre-long buildings, of which the middle courtyard was covered with a tented roof for various official receptions. The empire was finally destroyed by bloody battles and savage court intrigue. Eberus Mentuap, who ruled most of the time for her son Iyasu II, allowed the palace to be built. A final flowering of courtly power began at the end of the 17th century and attracted merchants from Europe, the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula. The architecture of the palace displayed more decorative elements than those of fortification. Just outside the center of the city, a sturdy wall surrounds a garden planted with trees, in the middle of which is a castle and moat, the bathroom of Fasilides. The emperor came here to take a bath, which was probably more of a ceremony than an imperial pleasure. The building was built on supporting pillars, accessible via a bridge, and was situated in the middle of a large water basin. On the ground floor, the emperor took off his royal insignia, undressed in the window recess, and then took his bath on the balcony. In late Gondar times, the palace was converted into a church and ordained by the sainted emperor Fasilides. Only during the Timkat festival, the feast of the baptism of Christ, is water directed into the basin from the nearby river. On a hill in the town, Emperor Iyasu I had the Debre Birhan Selassie built, the monastery of the Holy Trinity on the Mountain of Light. Through a gate tower, both men and women believers entered the walled complex and gathered in the courtyard around the church. According to legend, it was not only the sturdy wall that protected against the hostilities of the Mahdists. A swarm of bees threatened would-be attackers. The church was built according to the unusual religious form of a long axiomite basilica. The pillared outer gallery corresponds with the ancient cathedral of Aksum and the rock churches of Medan Arim in Laribera. Simple images of Jesus, the Holy Trinity, and Our Lady decorate the external gallery, protected by a canopy supported by numerous columns. At the main entrance of the church sits a priest who blesses each believer by request in front of the image of the Trinity. Wonderful murals adorn the interior. On the walls are elaborate biblical scenes and motifs of traditional legends. The heads of angels on the ceiling bring to mind the souls of the beheaded. On another hill is the complex of Cusquam, well protected behind sturdy walls. Outside the front gate is a small cemetery where past abbots of the monastery are buried. Within the monastery walls is the Debre Tsehai Church, located next to the ruins of the palace of the Empress Mentawab. It is believed that the interior of the church was splendidly decorated, but fell victim to the onslaught of the Mahdists. In the towers along the wall live the monks who not only guard both church and palace, but even more. Stored within a tiny adjoining building are the last relics of the luxury, art, and knowledge of those bygone times. During the reign of the Empress, the second Gondar style of painting developed, more lively and colourful than in the preceding period. But few works of art are kept in this small crypt. Along with the remains of the Empress and her son. Through a gate in the monastery wall is the second walled area. Here the ruins of the palace indicate its original design and its magnificent location overlooking the city. Here lived the Emperor's Mentawab when life became too dangerous in Fasilgadi. Finally, the empire disintegrated into warring principalities, a fact that spelled the inevitable decline of the imperial city of Gondar.